Hey everyone, I hope you're doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. And in this video, it's all about humanoid encounters, so it's going to get real terrifying and real strange. So if you think that's something you're going to be interested in, pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. To begin, I should explain that I'm half Northern Irish and half Welsh. My grandfather worked to trace the Irish side back to when written records began, coming from Irish royal houses. This is relevant to who banshees appear to and for. My parents divorced when I was 11 or 12. My father was never around even before that. Growing up, my mother and grandmother looked after us. I had always been interested in stories about our family and our history, as well as those about folklore. At age 13, I was sent off to a boarding school in England. The boarding house was old, and it had flights of stairs at the center that were open. One term, when I was 15, I was assigned to a room on the opposite side of the floor to the loos. I would have to cross next to the stairs to get to them, so one night I woke up needing to use them. I walked down my corridor and prepared to turn the corner to get into the door that leads to the stairs. I hear this horrific, wailing scream. I've heard foxes, but this was not a fox, and it sounded like a woman. I instantly froze, and it carried on for a long while, but then subsided. Still frozen, I immediately think a banshee, based on all the stories I was told as a child. I jump as the window next to me rattles, but looking at it, it appears to be nothing. It appears that in this case, the window was rattled just by the wind. In that moment, I felt stupid. The cry must have been wind whistling through the gaps in the old window. Relieved, I decided to continue to the bathroom. I turned the corner to get to the door to the stairway I would have to pass to get there. There's a faint green glow coming through the safety glass window of the door. Scared but curious, I open the door, terrified, but I keep going because I need to go to the loo now more than ever. I creep along toward the loo, approaching the stairs under a faint green glow. I hear the cry again. I freeze and look to the source of the sound and see the source of the light. It's a woman in a long green dress or robe with a black hooded shawl. She's standing at the top of the stairs next to the floor. She has pale skin, long black hair, and all of her is translucent. Her dress is giving off faint green light, and her skin is giving off faint white light. She's not grotesque or ugly in any way, but I was looking at a banshee. I turn and run back to my room. I hide there until morning. I think nothing of the banshee, and I presume that it was just a nightmare. But about a week later, it was the end of the term, and I fly home. I met my uncle and mother at the airport. I wondered why he was there, but didn't say anything. We drive home in near silence. As soon as we step through the door, I'm told that my grandmother died a week before, but they chose to wait to tell me until I was back. I cried. I knew that she was sick and dying. I just didn't expect it to come so soon. I thought that I would have maybe one more holiday with her to say goodbye. I didn't connect the two events until years later, and I forgot all about the banshee. I was 18. I left school. I was at a drinks event at a hill tomb that I had an internship at, celebrating a new exhibit that was opening. The talk inevitably turns to the Aos Si and to the banshees. I am reminded of my sighting, and I tell the people that I am with about it, and laugh about how I must have imagined it or dreamt it, about how scared I was, and then I laughed it off, and the other people laughed as well. I then mentioned that I was terrified that I was going to die as the banshee heralded my death, and laughed again. One lady, though, didn't laugh at this, and she said something that made my blood run cold, something that I had forgotten or not understood about the Banshee legend as a child. She told me, Banshees don't herald your death, they herald the death of a family member. I think I froze as my brain put it all together, and I realized that the Banshee must have been there to tell me that my grandmother was about to die. Popular culture about Banshees is very wrong. In traditional folklore, they are not evil. They do not bring death. They merely precede it. They are not hags out to steal souls. Some say that they are an ancestor of the family lamenting the loss of a descendant, or a type of Aos Si that watches over a particular family. I now look back on that Banshee fondly, almost. I still miss and mourn for my grandmother, but knowing her, she would be so happy and honored to know that a Banshee preceded her death. So this was originally written in Spanish, and I've put it through Google Translate, so some things may be a little wonky, but let's give her a go. In the city where I live, sightings of humanoid birds that attack farmers or travelers on the surrounding highways are usually reported. Now before, I couldn't believe that, but listening to so many people close to me confirming this kind of thing makes me feel strange. From my stepfather and to farmers and farm workers on the approaches of the city that I live in, I would not be surprised to hear another story again in the future, and I'm here to relate an event that happened to a friend of my ex-brother-in-law's. This terrified me. It was February 24th, 2017, and my brother-in-law told us what happened to a friend of his days ago. This guy was an agronomist who was in charge of a warehouse where they kept walnuts for commercial sale throughout the state. Usually, these wineries are located near the open field walnut plantations, and the workers often live on land on the properties. The guy was having dinner with his children when his dogs began to bark heavily outside the house. The guy went out into the courtyard that extended to one side of the field. He noticed that his 3 dogs were barking toward this field. For a moment, he thought that it was some drug addict or drunk who had strayed from the path near the road and decided to go out and see what it was. It's important to note too that these dogs are huge and altogether could probably not be taken down by a regular adult man. When he got to where his dogs were, they fell silent and began to extend their heads to the field where the walnut trees were located. He started searching through the barely lit trees with his flashlight that had a yellow bulb in it. At first, he found nothing, but after looking up at the top of the walnut tree, there was a very thin man holding onto the trunk. He looked at it, and then waited for a few seconds for his eyes to adjust better and try to notice just what this thing was. The creature was anything but human, covered in feathers, and was double the size of the man, and had bumps on his arms. The farmer thought that this was a hallucination from exhaustion or maybe the heat, but when he composed himself, he understood his situation. The creature was an owl, or something roughly close to these animals. He had a dark beak and eyes, but noticed the same pattern that he had seen in nature documentaries. This one was hunting him. He knew it when the creature did not look away and began to move toward a branch and began to smile and spread these bizarre-looking wings to try and fly. The farmer turned and began to run. He had his heart up in his throat from shock. He knew that he would not make it, but by a miracle, his dogs began attacking the creature. When he reached the door, he prevented any of his children from leaving and closed the door behind him. The confused children were told to listen and not ask questions. They closed the doors and covered the windows. while in the distance they heard how their dogs fought wildly with that thing. Everything seemed fine until they heard the screech of one of these, and then silence, and then 2 other screeches. The farmer turned off all the lights to prevent that thing from seeing them from the outside. During that time, he and the children were silent as they heard footsteps prowling all around his house. They lasted like this all night without sleeping until dawn. At 7 in the morning, the guy came out to see what happened and found a state that left a bad taste in his mouth. There in the middle of his yard was a pile of meat, bones, and organs that belonged to his dogs. Everything was destroyed and bathed in blood, but what was terrifying to him the most was to see that the concrete that his house was on top of were stained with blood and some liquid that looked to be similar to urine. That same morning, he buried the remains of his dogs and prepared for him and his children to go to the city where I live. In the end, he contacted my brother-in-law, who worked at a local newspaper. Obviously, he could not get my brother-in-law to publish anything of what he said happened. His bosses refused to let him do this. The farmer also did not want to reveal his name or whereabouts. There were lots of questions that the farmer didn't seem to want to answer, and after realizing that he did not have enough money to leave that house and look for another job where he could take his children, he did the only thing that he knew to do, was to buy a gun and take it home. My brother-in-law asked the farmer why he didn't take any pictures, and the farmer said, "You think they would have believed me if I showed them my broken dogs and photos? You really think they would help me?" And that seems to be the end of the story, as far as I know. I never heard of the matter again. I have a weird story, but they're not from people I know. This might have been from a friend of a friend, but I can't actually remember where it came from. I guess it's worth noting that there is a lot of stories and urban legends, but this one stood out because it does actually have to do with some uncommonly known facts about skinwalkers. The way that shamans usually undo the curse or drive them away. They have to find out the name of the skinwalker, go to the place where it lives, and then say its name aloud. Most people don't know the name part, so they just go to said place to trash it, show it some business. Most of the time, if you have a problem, it's either because you have dabbled or talked about it a lot, and thus drew its presence to you, or you are related to it somehow. But anyway, this is the story that I heard from a friend of a friend or somewheres. So some sheeps, horses, and cows keep getting slaughtered and ripped into, like a beast have been doing it, but something much different than a bear. They notice bite marks that would vaguely fit the size of a human, so it definitely cannot be a bear. They're all thinking that there's some bad juju going on around here. They call the police. They just shrug it off and tell them to keep watch, maybe set up some bear traps. Everyone decides to go with the first one because they know that it's not bears. At some point while on watch that night, they see white eyes crawl from over the barn. Everyone thinks, "Oh shit." They know what this is, and it's meaner than a chupacabra. However, instead of confronting it that night, they just go back inside the house and lock the doors. They're not dealing with that. They're broke. They can't buy a shaman, but they also can't risk losing more livestock. They call up more friends. A couple of nights later, they decide to go hunting for this thing. My friend gets a bunch of buddies in his truck, and they follow it after some obvious bait, and find out just where this thing lives. Once they get a good idea, they think, "We're going to come back tomorrow, because we're not stupid enough to do this at night." So my friend and the boys get walkie-talkies, shotguns, knives, tourniquets, anything that may be of help to them. One of them stays up by the car, while my friend and more of them go down to the little rundown shack. Apparently, it's more dilapidated than they would have ever expected, and it's really out in the open, almost obvious. It's too dark to go inside. Instead, they circle the perimeter carefully. They decide to wait for an all clear. They want to walkie-talkie the guy up on the ridge, but they decide not to because everything feels a little too open. They burn some warding weed and they throw it into the building to smolder. They're thinking, who gives a shit if it catches on fire? Hopefully, that sends the message. They go back up to the ridge to drive home. The buddy who kept the watch was pale as a ghost and wanted to get the hell in the truck and get the hell out of there. They ask him what happened, trying to calm him down. After they were a good deal away, speeding through the plateau, he tells them that he saw a shadowed human-like or animal-like person stalking them from the other side of the adobe. He tells them that he was worried that if he startled it by walkie-talkieing in, that they would have gotten attacked. Everyone's thoroughly freaked out, but that was the last time that any of them had ever seen it. This is a story of a guy that I met in the woods and a few friends of his. I can't guarantee anything as to its accuracy. I'm just going on what he told me to be true. So, be my friend and a couple buddies. They head out on the Highline Trail in Utah's Uintas Mountains. They plan to be there for a week. They have enough cars in the group so as to be able to park one at each end of the trail. Everybody is excited to be out in the mountains together. But unfortunately, it wasn't long before weird things started happening. It starts out with things like hiking poles and backpacks ending up at the opposite sides of the camp to where people left them. Everybody's boots are upside down in the morning. They hang their food bags on certain trees at night, but find them tied to other trees in the morning. Most people brush this off as animals or someone in their group getting a midnight snack. But weirder and weirder stuff starts happening. My friend wakes up to find muddy handprints all over the inside of his tent fly, in between the inner tent and the fly. As they're hiking, they lose the trail, only to backtrack and find large, freshly cut branches and a clever disguise laid over the actual trail. People are starting to think that they're being stalked. What really starts freaking people out, though, is waking up to find their tents rearranged in their campsite. The stakes of non-freestanding tents look like they're all undisturbed, but the tents are all in different places around the camp. Nobody has any idea how their tents could have been all moved around, and in some cases, apparently broken down and repitched, with none of them noticing or waking up. The next night, they decide to keep watch in 3-hour shifts. Everyone is on edge. The watchmen get thick branches, tie knives to the ends, and arm themselves with bear mace. The first half of the night, nothing happens. Then it's my friend's turn to stand watch. He's got his camera because he figures that the flash can illuminate wide areas if something comes close. It doesn't matter though, because he falls asleep just before dawn, and nothing happens that night. The next morning though, somebody asks him why he was taking pictures last night. My friend freezes, slowly takes out the camera, and checks the memory. There's pictures of everyone in the group sleeping, including himself. By following a creek a little ways upstream, they are able to find the trail, which someone recognizes as being not too far from their campsite. They only have 12 miles to go before they get to the trailhead, but it's early afternoon, and they're doubtful that they can finish their trip the same day. Reaching their campsite, they find all their gear shredded to pieces. Apparently, only one backpack was unharmed. They find where their food had been hung, scooped up as much as they could save from where it was scattered on the ground. Somebody luckily finds the car keys, and they basically run the rest of the way back, getting lost several times, but reaching the trailhead before dark. When they finally get to the trailhead, everyone is too exhausted to make camp or do anything, so all 6 of them just pile into the car, lock the doors, and fall asleep. A knock on their window wakes them up early the next morning. It's the police, and the cop wants to know what these people are doing in a closed area. As they try to explain the situation, the cop tells his own story. He says that the entire entrance to the forest had been closed for days due to abnormal animal activity. My friend is getting suspicious why the police are handling the closure and not the forest rangers. He asks as much. The cop goes quiet and looks away. It's a very awkward moment, which is interrupted by one of my friend's hiking companions in the car. He notices, now that it's morning, that there are about a dozen other cars in the parking lot, but they all have flat tires. Everybody gets out of the car and realize that their own tires are flat. At this point, the cop comes clean and explains that there's actually an open manhunt in the area, but they're not exactly sure what they're dealing with. In the last week, there have been lots of dead hikers to turn up. My friend remembers the strange photos and gets out his camera to show the cop. The cop's face suddenly goes blank, and he hands back the camera. It's a photo that was taken inside the car the night before, partially visible in the last photo, which is of my friend's sleeping face, like some kind of party photo where the taker holds the camera at arm's length to get himself in. Is the right half of a pure white face with black holes for eyes and a mouthful of sharpened animal-like teeth. So if there was one of those that really stuck out to you, let me know which one it was down in the comments. If you would like to donate to the channel, there's a PayPal and a Patreon in the description, along with super thanks here on YouTube. Also, there is an email if you would like to send in your story. And with that, I think I will keep you no longer. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, you can feel free to like and subscribe. And thank you for pulling up a stump, thank you for watching, and make sure to keep following the 3 H's of the channel. It's pretty hot where I live. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one.